Gina was raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and is currently based in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. She is a filmmaker, video archivist, and co-editor of the film section for the Brooklyn Rail. Dan Sullivan is a writer and film programmer for Film at Lincoln Center, and the film co-editor of the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I will turn the conversation over to our film editors.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start off maybe. Thanks everyone for coming. It's so good to see so many people, especially with everything going on. You know, it's funny when Fong approached us about doing this a few weeks ago. I mean, it feels like months ago in some ways because time is so strange right now. But, you know, I think Dan and I had kind of different ideas about what we would talk about just because I make films, I archive films, Dan programs films, and then just all of the events that have taken place just in such a short span of time in the film industry. I think we've kind of developed a lot of different ideas of kind of relating our practices and what we do to what's happening today. I don't know if you want to say something, Dan, before I start to talk about filmmaking.
No, it's just, you know, I think today we wanted to touch on a few different sort of the constituent spheres of the film world and how the myriad of crises on our hands are sort of touching all those spheres, including, you know, a few sort of facets of the film industry that I think maybe people who like don't work in our field might not think about, but they're relevant and they're changing, and they're going to change the ways that we engage with the moving image for a long time. So
yeah, I think maybe we'll start off on a more positive note because I know that kind of sounded a little ominous. I'm actually going to change my background to be one of my films, which is a little bit what I'll talk about just for a short while. God, maybe like 10 years ago now, I kind of became interested in exploring cinema, especially older films, through video, instead of just writing about them. And very quickly, that practice turned from what I would say is a more critical video essay type thing into making collage and montage-based films using found footage. So you can kind of see behind me, you know, that's from a John Ford film. Obviously with other images and other work applied to it. And when I was thinking about doing this talk and talking a little bit about my practice, I realized we're in a really unique moment where making found footage work, you know, making work from what you have is kind of the filmmaking that we're gonna have for, you know, an indefinite amount of time. The new work that we create in the next 2 to however many months is going to be, you know, work that exists, footage that exists, whether it's footage you've already shot or whether it's using older images kind of to tell new stories. It seems relevant in this moment to also think about, well, you know, a thought I had when I was getting into this practice, you know, when Occupy Wall Street happened, I remembered going down to the site and looking around, and you'd see 30, 40, so many people holding their camera up and pointing it at the same image. And I remember being really overwhelmed by this idea of why do we need that many images? Where are all those images going, and why are we all recording them? You know, there have been actual studies that say when you take an image, when you take a picture, take a video, your brain actually thinks that it no longer has to remember that image. Your brain is noticing that you're taking a picture and your brain is kind of forgetting that image. So just in thinking about this kind of mass collection of new images, I think I became really interested in telling stories using old images. And a lot of my work is very emotional work, and I use images from classic Hollywood films to create what I like to think of as new stories. And it's a practice that now seems, you know, it's something I'm thinking a lot about in terms of what lies ahead for the kind of films we make, how we tell our stories, what images we can even collect, and this idea of using old images. I guess the second part of this thing that might be interesting to talk about in relation to this, because it will also segue into what my day job is, which I work as a video archivist. is I also became really interested in the idea of using, one of the reasons, you know, to use older films in my work is to keep them alive in a new context. You know, I always think about MoMA a little bit, and if you walk around MoMA, the museum proper, there's hip, young, cool people walking all around. And if you go down to the theaters at MoMA to see a movie from 1933, it's really, I'll just say that's not the vibe you get down in the theaters. And I really, you know, these movies are really important to me, and I really want to keep them alive in a new context. So I'm definitely interested in using my filmmaking as almost a different kind of archival method in creating a living history with these images. And, you know, I mean, my favorite kind of movies for sure are definitely the period of pre-code films, and those films are primarily from 1930 to 1933, Great Depression era films. And, you know, with 10 million people applying for unemployment, I don't know if there's a more relevant body of work that we could be watching than American films from 1930 to 1933. So, you know, that's that in terms of, I guess, my work. And then my work as a video archivist, I manage a private archive, and a huge part of that archive is a massive collection of VHS tapes of television taped in the 80s and the 90s. And I kind of fell in love with the textures of VHS. The colors are different, the textures are different. Especially in our age of digital clarity, it's really incredible to look at the colors and textures of something recorded off of television, a Technicolor film that maybe was recorded off of television in the 1990s. And, you know, something Dan and I talk a lot about, and I think maybe where this will connect to what Dan does more specifically, you know, with cinema, it's this really unique art form where there is no final version. You know, if someone watched a Raoul Walsh film in the 1990s on TNT, you know, the version of the film that they know is a film with saturated color, with textures, and with commercial breaks, most likely. And that could be the only way that film was ever seen by that person. And for them, that will always be the definitive version of that film. And, you know, especially now that we're in these home isolated moments, right? Cinema will only exist in our homes on a massive variety of home viewing devices. So it's, you know, archival in thinking about what cinema is and how it will exist in the future, and how it's going to have a living history in terms of how we look at it. It's a kind of a crazy time to think about that, and to think about how we preserve and view cinema as an art form. Yeah. So I guess maybe I'll turn it over to Dan for a little bit now to talk about kind of what he does.
Yeah, so when I'm not moonlighting as a co-editor of the film section of The Rail, I work as a film programmer at Film at Lincoln Center, you know, one of the sort of like major art house venues here in the city. I think maybe I'll just begin, you know, I don't want to take it as a given that people know sort of what that work entails or why it might be necessary. I think, you know, the role of the programmers kind of, you know, in collaboration with the, you know, the team they work with to, you know, preserve and frame film history for a contemporary audience, and to, you know, showcase interesting or notable contemporary films. So, you know, not so dissimilar from how curating functions in the other arts. But, you know, I think, you know, just the art, my entire field finds itself in this very curious moment. I guess curious would be kind of putting it in, mildly, where we all work on public programs. We program for the cinema. We program to have people come and attend screenings and physically be present in a room amongst other people who are also physically present, sharing a film together. And obviously we can't do that, and it remains to be seen when we'll be able to do that again. So on the one hand, I think the pandemic, particularly for, the sort of independent wing of the film exhibition sphere, it's just a moment of great suspension. It remains to be seen when we can get back to business as usual, or even if we'll be able to get back to business as usual. And so, I think that has led to a lot of people trying to conceptualize what it means to continue to do film curating, to continue to exhibit films in a historical moment where people can barely leave their homes. So, I think straight away we're seeing a lot of places shifting towards dabbling in streaming, which is, of course, none of our sort of, default areas of expertise, I guess. But we're trying to figure it out because, and this touches on sort of the other part of the industry that I, in my day job, I deal with extensively, which is film distribution, the companies that enable us to see most films at all, in the first place. And they, in a lot of cases, depending on the company, there's already some kind of infrastructure there for them to be able to do their own kind of streaming that is somehow different from Netflix and Hulu and what have you. And that's a function of the fact that a lot of these distribution companies don't just do theatrical releasing; they're also doing home video and so on. And we're seeing venues shift in that direction too. But I think none of us. I don't think any of us are treating it like it's going to be a permanent state of affairs. This is kind of a temporary moment, I think, in the history of film exhibition in the U.S. I fear I'm rambling here.
Well, I think what's kind of interesting, but also terrifying, is I've been reading the other day about a filmmaker, Henry King, who made movies in the Great Depression, and he was telling, in his oral history, he talks about making this beautiful film, State Fair, in 1933, and how, at that moment, they hadn't have any money to pay kind of all the under the line people, all the secretaries and the gate men and the grips and all the people who really make the movie. And Henry King and Janet Gaynor and Will Rogers all forfeited their salaries because they knew how important it was for people to be employed, right? And to have people have jobs during this time. And it's like, we have no model for this. We have no model for what it means for cinema to exist on screens or for cinema to be created in this moment where you are isolated in your house. Obviously, I think during a lot of times of economic strife, going to the movies is a way people cope and a way people deal with kind of uncertainty, and with, economic, movies were always kind of inexpensive, and they were always something you could turn to. And we're in a moment now where that's not the case, or it's not the case publicly, at least. And it's a little bit terrifying to think about what that means. Not only psychologically, I think, but also in terms of what that means in terms of what people adjust to and what people get used to. I want to believe that in like 6 months or 2 months, or I don't know, however many months, theaters will reopen and people will flock to them and it will be this joyous thing. but I also, you know, and I don't know how you feel about this, Dan, I also worry about a risk of people kind of adjusting to this new reality, or what happens when something is absent too long, when we lose access to spaces for too long, along with just dealing with the reality of these spaces being able to be kept open without the right kind of support from our government.
Yeah, and you know, I think part of the economic fallout from this is, you know, of course, on the most fundamental level, it's just going to entail cuts sort of across the industry, which we're already seeing, of course. But those cuts will have consequences for people to be able to access films, to be able to access specific copies of films, because, and I meant to bring this up earlier, especially apropos of what Gina was saying concerning the, you know, this notion of there not being sort of a true final version of a film, that these objects are sort of, their stability is almost illusory. They're changing. These, you know, as objects, these films are changing constantly over time as they, you know, as they're seen in different forms, different technological forms, and so on. But you know, in film curating, we're quite concerned with the actual material object that we're exhibiting to the audience, and you know, I think it's safe to assume there are going to be access problems there for curators and for spectators alike.
Yeah.
And you know, also, you know, like Gina and I, just as like film goers, we all, you know, we're often going to see like a specific print of a film or a specific version of a film, which on the one hand would suggest that the theatrical experience can, you know, probably endure this, because I don't think that the sort of desire to see sort of specific iterations of films from throughout the medium's history, I don't think that's going to dissipate. But of course, you know, if we as you know, as curators can't access those copies in the first place, it's going to be tough.
Well, I think there's a real, you know, something I've learned working with a video collection, you know, of movies that were taped off of television. In the 80s and 90s, you had PBS, you had like CUNY TV, you had Bravo, you had TNT, TBS, TCM. You had a plethora of stations playing, for example, classic films, the history of cinema. And, you know, that people think that we have access to everything. That's kind of the assumption that's being made, that you can access any film you want, anytime on the internet. And the reality is, a lot of movies, I would say, made pre-1950, 1960, pre-1970 even at this point, they're not available. And there actually are, I was kind of shocked to learn just how many films by big directors that have stars in them, you know, the only digital version, the only version the public has access to is if someone taped it off of television and it exists in like a torrent community or exists in a shared community. Those are the only versions of those films that exist outside of studio prints. They haven't been digitized, they haven't been released on DVD. And the main way they're seen outside of what I would say are these private communities, if someone was lucky enough to tape it off of television, the only place that these films get exhibited is if there is a screening of a 35 millimeter print. So it really does become, you know, if smaller theaters get nixed, and if budgets, you know, a big thing is right now, it costs a lot to exhibit 35 millimeter. So if you have all these institutions whose budgets have been cut down, the access we're going to have to 35 millimeter prints is also obviously going to go down. They're not going to be able to import them. They're not going to have the funds to bring them in. And, you know, there's also a real question of how restoration work will continue in the future. Will there be funds for that? If people aren't, you know, most restoration is funded by donors. There are a variety of institutions in this country that kind of work on figuring out what films they want to restore, and then finding someone with a who has money who's interested in restoring that specific film. And you have to wonder, you know, how generous those people are going to be in the future. Will there be as much money for things like restoring films? And it's a, you know, it's a big question. I was talking with someone at my office who helps head up a lot of, you know, restorations, and she was wondering if, you know, the last restoration we did was the last restoration that will happen. So there are, you know, it's a scary moment. I think I find I think there is some hope in terms of what we can do as individuals in creating communities and archiving our own works. So in the present tense, the history of cinema is a scary thing, but I think in the present tense, with work being made today, I hope that there are ways, this, you know, a lot of this being on the computer so much brings us together to think of different ways that we can archive work being made now.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it seems entirely possible to me that, like, sort of to Gina's point, there could be new forms of collectivity, solidarity, and so on within amongst sort of all kinds of film workers that will just necessarily change the way that everything is organized. And so, you know, I'm not holding my breath for, like, you know, real deal federal funding for the arts in general, I guess. But at the same time, you know, if the money from donors and so on isn't there to underwrite restoration efforts, you know, all manner of archival projects, and the, you know, the not lucrative but necessary practice of screening films, you know, on 35 millimeter or whatever, for a public who goes to see them in a theater and so on. If we can't sort of rely on the kind of donor class in order to make that happen, then I think, you know, people need to band together to find alternatives to relying on those resources.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. How are we doing on time, Charlie? Oh no, I can't hear you.
We're doing very well. Very
Okay.
much enjoying your conversation. If you guys want to chat for another 5 minutes up to 1:30, that's cool. If you want to roll into Q&As, I've got a few that have come through.
Cool. What do you think, Dan?
I just, yeah, I mean, just real quick, I wanted, you know, I think, you know, we're going to hear a lot. I think we've already heard a lot. We're going to hear a lot in the days and weeks ahead of people at various non and for-profit, like, film organizations losing their jobs, being furloughed or what have you. But I also, you know, it seems important to also, you know, just as consumers of artworks, be they films or not, also think about sort of the like the workers who, you know, the person who tears your ticket, the person who sells you the ticket, the person who sells you way too expensive fountain soda. You know, these are, you know, all things considered, the people who are going to be hit the hardest, at least within our, you know, within our industry. So yeah, I don't know. If nothing else, it'd be nice if people just, you know, think about these workers who have very little in the first place and now will really have very little. And if you can, you know, contribute to things like the Cinema Workers Solidarity Fund when it starts its next stage, so that we can help them out a bit.
For sure. And I guess maybe, you know, I'll read this just because it really made me happy and inspired the other day. This is the section from Henry King. Henry King made movies from the silent era through the 1960s. He worked mostly for 20th Century Fox, which I guess is now just 20th Century. But he, in 1933, like I said, he made State Fair, and I think this might be a good note to go out on this all, just in terms of thinking about maybe the future of cinema that we want to exist, and thinking about how just as a country we're treating our workers. Henry King said, "State Fair was made during the period of the Depression. One day, Wendy Sheehan, who was the head of the studio, called in Will Rogers and me to his office and said, 'You know, we are without funds to pay the salaries, and I want to know if we can hold back your salaries, you and Will and anybody who's getting any amount of money.' He wanted to do this to the people who are on the steady salary at Fox, not those who were brought in just for this picture. I'll never forget what Will Rogers said. 'You can withhold mine all you want if it's going to keep the gate men and the secretaries and everybody from losing out, people who are depending on their weekly salaries.' I said, 'Yes, I agree with that 100%. If we stop the production, we're going to put more people out of work and do more damage than you're going to do by just not paying Will and Janet and myself.' When he said, 'It's just for this one picture,' I said, 'You hold my salary until you have the money to pay everybody's.' And Will Rogers said the same, and Janet Gaynor said the same. So I think we just, the arts are in a funny moment where a lot of people make a lot of money, and then there's a lot of people who support the arts that maybe don't make as much money. And I think, if we want, whether it's film, art, music, if we want those things to survive, we need to come up with ideas and strategies to make sure that those people who support the making of films, the exhibition of films, the restoration of films, not all of those people are supported and can continue to do that vital work whenever we're allowed out of our apartments again. So I think that's I'm ready for, I think we can do some questions then maybe.
Yeah.
Or I can just recommend pre-code films for everybody to watch.
Hey, there we are. Yeah, that would be excellent, Gina. That would be really excellent. Maybe you could do that in the chat. I think a lot of people would really appreciate that. In the meantime, our first question comes from Nick Bennett. Nick, are you able to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yep. It's a serendipitous one because what Gina just mentioned, I was curious. Well, firstly, I just wanted to sort of observe quickly that, films and movies have been maybe my greatest comfort at the moment as we're all kind of, sheltering in place. You had mentioned some pre-code films and, like the connection to films made during the Great Depression, Gina. And I was genuinely curious if, what were some other recommendations for us to watch at the moment. And I likewise was curious if other people joining in, just in general, if there are films that have been, really inspiring or uplifting for you at the moment. I'd love to hear what other people are watching.
I mean, I think the first place to start is probably with my favorite filmmaker of all time. I mentioned him earlier. His name's William A. Wellman. He made an insane amount of movies between 1930 and 1933, like I think 3 or 4 films a year in some cases. And you see the same actors over and over again. So you really, even if you just watch these movies, not only are you getting kind of historical and political context along with great filmmaking, you kind of, throughout the process of how these films were made and who they were made with, you get this great process of solidarity. But there's a really incredible film Wellman made called Heroes for Sale. And it's about a guy who comes back from World War I and kind of really goes through the gamut of like kind of getting his life in order, but then the Depression kills it. There's this amazing shot of this giant sign that said like, men need work or looking for work, and Heroes for Sale is a great one. Wild Boys of the Road is probably the ultimate one to watch. Just these, I'll put up that image again. I can put up some images from that film behind me, but you kind of, those are the kids riding the rails, throwing things at the cops who are trying to, stop them from riding the rails. And it's a really kind of amazing film. And it has this energy. And the only thing that's so sad about it is Wellman really wanted it to have this kind of realistic ending. And he didn't get his wish, is all I'll say. But also, I think, like I mentioned Henry King, I actually think State Fair is a really good film to watch. It's not about the Depression as much as it's about a rural family kind of coming together. And what King is really great at is showing he's really a storyteller who cares about people. And you can see that in how he conducts his life as a person, giving up his salary. But it's a beautiful movie about family and about coming together and spending time with people you care about, which to me seems like a really important thing right now. But a few other Wellmans, there's a great film, Barbara Stanwyck made two really great films with him. One is called The Purchase Price and one is called So Big. And they're both about a woman who kind of has to go live in the country because she's not really making it in the city. The city is just too expensive. So she kind of goes to the more rural parts of America to get her to kind of figure out her life. I'm trying to think. I'll let me think of some more for a second. And I'll type them up into the chat, I guess. But I mean, any pre-code movie. I mean, actually a great one is this movie called Employee's Entrance. Like, definitely watch that one. It's a bunch of people. It's about a bunch of people, Loretta Young, who work in a shopping mall. And it's fascinating because the boss is played by Warren Williams. And what I love about this movie is that he's really ruthless. He's like really ruthless in how he treats his employees. It's pretty horrible. But the way they present him is almost like you understand why he's making these decisions. So there's a complexity there that to me seems really vital to our times as we kind of navigate this capitalist system that we live in and the realities, in connection with kind of our ideals. So I guess, is that okay for now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I will be looking these up. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. So our next question comes from Rebecca Santori, who is not audio enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and read her question for her. Dan said there might be new forms of solidarity in the film community. What might new forms of solidarity look like?
It might look like, well, I imagine there could potentially be like a stronger sort of effort to organize and unionize parts of the film industry that haven't previously been because of the economic crisis at hand. But I also this is cinema. It's like arguably the most industrial art, perhaps the most commercial, and so on. And that suggests like various serious flows of capital moving through it. And the way that that money is deployed has a lot to do with sort of some values of hierarchization and, people just, wanting to have like glamorous, luxurious lives. And I think that maybe it'll dawn on more people that as nice as that would be, it'd probably be better if, instead of one person having an extravagant, wonderful life, like 100 people could just live, period.
Yeah. Something, that I've always kind of struggled with as a filmmaker. This isn't true for every festival, but it's true for a lot of festivals. Filmmakers make films and often festivals don't pay them to screen their films. It's like an honor that you get to screen your film there. But you go to these festivals and there's just extravagant parties, right? So it's like they have money to somehow throw extravagant parties, but not to pay the filmmakers for their work. And I just like Dan was saying, I'm hoping it's a time when we can reconsider how we deploy our resources, from a Hollywood level, but to a level of the smaller artists that make our work, that make our independent work.
Yeah, and of course, I think it functions a bit differently at the level of the like experimental film community, kind of like artists film community and so on. Just because I think for one, a lot of those artists are used to working in relative isolation. It's not the same. It's just, it's a different practice than like people shooting films with, crews and casts and financiers and so on. but those, a lot of those people have university jobs. So depending on how the economic crisis hits how hard it hits academia, suddenly, the livelihoods for a lot of our kind of the most, interesting, kind of intrepid artists working in the medium, they could be imperiled by that too. So we don't quite, I don't know, it all has to play out a bit, but yeah.
It's funny, you saying that just like in a weird way gave me a little bit of hope for something specific, which is just as a filmmaker myself, over the past 10 years and watching kind of digital technology progress, I think I've become sad with how neat everything has gotten, how perfectly, the perfect digital specifications that every film has to have, and these crisp, clear images. And it feels like there was a small window where films could be kind of messy, and now that window in many ways has passed. And I don't know, maybe this will open up things for messy, weird films.
Yeah. And the kind of, the kind of like professionalization of it should be possible to be a working artist, of course, but, we've also seen, in cinema, and I'm sure in the other arts as well, the increasing kind of like professionalization of filmmaking as a pursuit, where it's not to say that, making money and getting attention and so on is the primary objective, but no, I just think there's an opportunity somewhere in here to rethink what we've been prioritizing, just as film professionals.
Yeah, it's something. Yeah, it'd be really nice if, I don't know, I guess in my mind, losing that professionalism. I mean, I want people to have jobs and get paid, and I'll be good. But I think this idea of making films just like as a resume item, I wouldn't mind if we lost some of that. I don't know. And I think, in some ways, a lot of this is, I mean, I guess it's really interesting, right? To be deemed an unessential member of society, right? Which we all have been. Like, I feel like almost all of us on this chat have been told we are not essential. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's I love Hollywood more than probably a lot of people. I love going and watching a big movie or whatever. But I don't know, a world where maybe we have other jobs that are more supportive of our communities, and then we make work just as a practice on the side. I don't know if that's such a bad thing.
Thanks. Those are really fascinating questions. I mean, answers. I'm going to move to Michael Metzger, who has the next question. Michael, I'm going to unmute you now.
Okay.
Michael,
am I on?
There? Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thanks everybody for this really interesting conversation. I have a question that kind of also along those lines around opportunities that this situation might kind of open up. I'm thinking particularly about ways that the COVID crisis and the way it's impacting the cinema community might sort of offer some lessons for what in the future when we start taking climate change more seriously and factoring in sustainability into our programs, into the way that we source films, into the way that we work, virtually with filmmakers, perhaps rather than, bringing people in person, sometimes from great distances. Also thinking about how, as we do the work of importing and tracking tracking down films, making sure that there is a larger network of institutions that are interested in showing those films or kind of working between institutions more. Are those some things that you've been considering as opportunities in this moment, or have kind of thought about how sustainability factors into this question?
I mean, I guess I'll say something, and then Dan can talk about this too, from just his experience working at an institution who's bringing in prints, bringing in DCPs, who has working at a festival, but the contradictions in consumption and in sustainability with cinema are kind of mine. It's a lot to wrap your head around. I've been, you know, on one hand, you're hearing it's so great. You can see how much our world is probably benefiting. The air is cleaner from all of us just being in our apartments. But, you know, streaming, there's a huge electronic burden that comes, electricity burden, right, from streaming. The amount of electricity used to stream is massive. And I can't even kind of fathom what is happening with that right now. So I guess that's one thing I've been thinking a lot about, just in terms of sustainability in the environment, but largely related to maybe what you were talking about with, you know, something that I guess I'll say that I always kind of get frustrated about or seems crazy to me is when, you know, in September, all of New York flies to Toronto to see films in Toronto, that many of which will be in New York in like a few weeks. So I think, you know, there will be, I mean, I hope that there'll be a place for people to really think about what's necessary versus maybe what's nice or what's fun. And, you know, it's so hard, right? Because we definitely need to kind of lower our footprint in I think in the entertainment, in the cinema realm. Obviously, everyone needs to lower their footprint, but it's so, you know, it's so complicated, right? Because you could easily do a Skype Q&A, but I'm sure we're all thinking about now how important human physical connection is. So I think we just kind of have to start to weigh those things and really think about them. And we do have this pause now where we kind of can start to think about those things and, you know, looking at cost benefit analysis in a weird way of what's required. I don't know. I don't have a good answer because it's a really complicated thing, but it's on my mind a lot.
Yeah, no, mine too. And I don't have much more to add to what Gina was saying, besides, just kind of emphasizing that I think the contradictions are, you know, and I'm sure this isn't unique to just, you know, the film industry, but the contradictions are profound and unreconciled. And it feels like, you know, politically in this country, it feels like it was only relatively recent, sort of a recent development that we even had sort of, you know, prominent figures in the government sort of outlining a vision of what would actually be necessary, you know, the Green New Deal and so on, or at least what would be, you know, the sort of bare minimum start of kind of some action on that front. So I don't know. We don't have any time, but at the same time, it might take some time.
Yeah. I mean, you know, something that I kind of pessimistically have, well, I guess pessimistically to my heart, is that, you know, and this maybe gets to that thing, right, about what essential workers and not essential workers. Cinema is the most, you know, in many ways is the most important thing to my heart, to my life, to the way I've chosen to organize my life. But in this pause, you know, it's hard to not realize that it can't be the most important thing for the next chunk of time. You know, in thinking about, like, you know, the fall, right, there's this huge festival season, it's Oscars, and there's this part of me that's like, how, you know, we can't be going to film festivals. We literally have to be traveling the country and knocking on people's doors, because if we don't fix the world, if we don't get a functioning infrastructure and fix our world, then I don't know how we can fix the arts. You know, one has to come before the other. If you have an infrastructure in place, if you have social services in place, if you have better green policies in place, you build that groundwork, then you can adjust the arts accordingly. And I don't know, you know, that's, I guess, what's largely on my mind too, is not only getting out of our rooms so that we can go to the cinemas, but getting out of our rooms so that we can organize, and getting out of our rooms so that we can knock on people's doors and talk to them and, you know, help them realize what's needed. You know, New York, we're all here, you know, those of us that are in New York are here because we love, I think largely because we love the arts. And these people I assume in this chat. And I, you know, I think it's a time to realize that we need to reconnect with the rest of the country somewhat and do what we can to just make this world, this country, you know, slightly more functioning and better for everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks. That was really motivational and thoughtful. The next question comes from Madeline Cravens. Madeline, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you both so much for coming. This is amazing. And I'd love to hear either of your thoughts, if you have them, on the filmmaker Jonas Mekas and the role of the Anthology Film Archives right now, the much beloved Anthology Film Archives. Yeah.
Well, I guess one thing I'll say before I let Dan talk is just that literally downstairs in my apartment, one of the only people I've seen in person for however long now is Anthology's programmer. He's my roommate, Jed Rapvogel. So I feel like I've been very connected to Jonas during this time, which has been great. And I just in case everybody knows, Anthology has put up some of Jonas's work on their Vimeo page for anyone to watch right now. But I'll let Dan talk a little bit.
Yeah, I used to work for Jet. So I used to work at Anthology for a while. So this is, yeah, this question was clearly a plant. And Jonas, yeah, I mean, Jonas is why I moved to New York in the first place. When I read about Anthology and read his criticism from The Voice for the first time in college, that sort of persuaded me that I had no idea where I wanted to go, but that New York seemed like probably the most sensible option because kind of the vision he laid out for, you know, what cinema can be and how it fits into the landscape of the city. As for you know, Anthology, what role Anthology can play, I mean, I would hope, well, you know, I think just staying extant is probably the highest priority because it's about as close a thing as we have to sort of Mecca in the New York film scene. So I think, you know, just shoring it up and ensuring that it can continue to exist just seems like the you know, the sort of the highest priority. And they you know, I think institutions like them, like a number of others, are just, because of the way our economy is structured, are just you know, constantly in peril. So I think we have to keep that in mind. But they are also, in addition to to Jonas's work that they're making available for free, they're also streaming a few films that we're going to get theatrical, or I think one film was already released, and then they had to cut the run short, and then another film was about to come out. Those two films are Thomas Heise's Heimat is a Space and Time, and Maiko, I forget his last name, a film entitled No Data Plan, both of which can still be streamed off their website. And it'd be great to support those films, because I think and the films that Anthology opens for a week, it's very important for those films, and it's very important for film culture in general, because those films might not otherwise be accessible to New Yorkers. So just good to support that.
Well, I'll say one thing though. I don't know how much, but how amazing would it be if Jonas was still here in his apartment making diaries during this quarantine? I can only imagine how amazing those would have been. So it makes me a little sad. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, he was the king of like figuring out what was happening in your life and making work out of it. So it's good to, I think, keep that spirit and that energy in mind.
Thanks, you guys. Next question is from a Rail contributor, Anthony Holly. Anthony, I'm going to unmute you, Anthony, and you can ask your question.
Thanks, guys. Hey.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi. First of all, thanks a lot for doing this. But my question, I guess, kind of relates also to what role this a new model plays. And it's I'm thinking about things like Kino Marquee's collaboration with different places like BAM and Film at Lincoln Center, or even something like Film Forum's new streaming rental model. And these aren't exactly modes that we're used to, because they're showing films that we'd otherwise see at places like Film Forum or Film in Lincoln Center, and that we wouldn't have access to these if they didn't exist. But I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about these, like in relationship to some of the larger streaming platforms, but then also in relationship to smaller things too, like different galleries or visual art models that are making things available for free online, and where something like this kind of falls for you, especially with the $9 to $12 kind of rental fee that's a lot higher than some other places' rentals.
Yeah. Well, it's a relatively new thing, so I think we're still figuring it out. But I guess, and I think I'm not sure to what degree this is apparent. Like when you go to a service like Kino Marquee, or there's another one, Kino Now, and there's a number of other ones that are kind of similar, is that the money you're paying is being split between the film distributor and the venue that would have been showing the film. That is kind of like they're sort of banding together with the distributor to make the work available. So I would suspect that it's higher because of the split and sort of the need for the two organizations that are partnering, like the fact that they're both not in an ideal financial situation because of all this. So that, yeah, but I think it remains to be seen. I think how effective it's going to be. It's clearly been cooked up as a kind of stopgap measure to keep some cash flowing into these venues and these distribution companies. So I don't know yet. I think I could very easily see a sort of virtual cinema component that becoming a much bigger part of film exhibition going forward. But I think we're all kind of just figuring it out still. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a really good way. I mean, I think it's a good way to keep the theaters in people's minds, and to also, I think, make people think about what it means to financially support our institutions. Something that I think has been kind of depressing, to say the least, is to realize how precarious so many of our institutions are, right? Like, to realize that like 1 month, 2 weeks or 1 month of not being able to sell tickets or do whatever they do means that the whole thing has to be shuttered and everyone has to be fired. To realize how many of these places are living paycheck, or week to week, month to month. And I guess I would have a hope that moving forward, we'd be thinking more sustainably just about how, hope these organizations think about the sustainability of how they live and how they exist. It's interesting, right? You have big institutions that are laying off a lot of their employees. And then you have Anthology, right? Which right now it functions on a much different scale. It's a much smaller scale, and it's a much more solidarity scale, and all of their people are still employed. Obviously not the part-time people who come in to work the box office, but so you can kind of look at that, and maybe we need to rethink how we organize ourselves and the work we're doing, because it is interesting that a place like Anthology so far is managing to keep everyone on, and that they can function that way, and that a lot of larger institutions can't.
Thanks, Gina. That was quite thoughtful. Next question, I'm going to go to Archie. It's not clear to me if his audio is enabled, so if I don't hear anything, I'm going to read it. Archie, are you there? You're on.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hey guys, how's it going? Greetings from London. I would just like to hear how you guys are dealing with the current situation, what the plans are kind of for the film section going forward, because I'm guessing there's not kind of a lot of stuff for you to get your teeth into at the moment. And I guess kind of as a second part of the question, you know, what is everyone's attitude towards kind of quarantine short films, and could the Brooklyn Rail ever be a platform for films that filmmakers are making in isolation?
Well, I guess I'll say one thing, which is that I somehow lucked into attending what I think was the last film festival. I was at True False, March, what day did I leave? I left March 4th and came back March 9th. And I think that might be the last film festival. So I will be covering that for the Rail. But thankfully, you know, we have a really great group of writers, and we have a lot of stuff planned in advance always, just in terms of schedules. I know, Dan, maybe you want to talk about Matt, you know, and CPH Docs doing a digital program.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as we're seeing some festivals, you know, like CPH Docs, for instance, moving to, or, you know, at least experimenting with these kind of virtual models for doing a film festival, at least for this year. We still want to cover these kinds of things. We do have a lot of our section planned out pretty far in advance, and it is sometimes, but not always, kind of tied to like the release schedule for you know, films that are going to receive theatrical runs in New York, for instance. Like in our next I guess the now current issue, where we have an interview with the Italian filmmaker Pietro Marcello, whose very major new feature, Martin Eden, was supposed to be released in New York this month. It remains to be seen, I think, what's going to happen with that, whether the film's distributor, which is Kino Lorber, is going to opt for you know, a digital release, as they've done with some of their other titles, like Bacurau.
Oh, and speaking real quick of Bacurau, we have a great interview that Anthony did with the directors that we'll be sending to you later today, Charlie.
But I think I might have lost the thread a little bit.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. But you know, but also we, you know, I think just for our section, we don't want to. We want to be attendant to the present without being tied down by any particular industrial schedule. So I think, you know, the readers can expect us to just, you know, keep on keeping on to some degree, and we're going to figure out what to do about sort of the items that are a little more kind of, you know, time and place sensitive, you know.
I mean, if anyone out there is interested, I mean, I think something that would be fun is to have, you know, more conversations about what this time means. So if anyone out there wants to make a pitch to us about quarantine viewing, or, you know, just what this time means, we're always happy to hear from people who have ideas about wanting to write for us. Did we answer your question, Archie, or do you have more? Okay.
I love making the pitch to the community, Gina. All right, so we've got time for one more question before we go to our poem, and to end the session, we're going to close with a question from Fong Bui. Fong, I'm going to unmute you and let you ask.
Thank you, you guys. It's not a really question, really following what you know, Gina and Dan, thanks for coming in today, you know, spoke so nicely and kindly about Anthology Film Archives and Jonah's Makers. As you know, that I'm on the board of trustees, and I very much invested in supporting the whole capital campaign. And I just want to read this nice letter that Sebastian Makers, my friend, board member, and found this amazing letters from many. We're going to have more of this. But this one is from Michelangelo Antonioni from June 5th, 1969. I just want to read it because I think for independent cinema to survive, we need to reach out to our fellow filmmakers, the one that in Hollywood, to sort of get back a little bit, support the counterculture film industry. So here it say, Dear Jonas, you asked me for a letter saying why I thought the work of filmmakers should be helped. Actually, I'm astonished that you need a letter of this kind. What can I possibly add about the work of your extraordinary group, which is famous all over the world? It is incredible that you should have to fight against these economic difficulties. I believe that the success of many commercial films today is because they have been influenced by underground movies. Anyway, I feel that you should absolutely have all the help you need in order to continue your experiments and researches, without which cinema could not continue to evolve in the way it has so far. Yours, Michelangelo Antonioni. Thank you, you guys.
Yay. I like that.
Thank you, Phong. That was a really great thing to read. That's beautiful. All right, now to close our session, we're going to do something that is a tradition at the Rail. We always have a poetry reading, and it's always a member of our staff. Today, we will have a poetry reading from Emily Dean.
Hey, okay. I'm gonna read a poem from Gap Gardening by Rosemary Waldrop. It's kind of like a series of poems, but I think I'm gonna read like two of them, called The Road is Everywhere or Stop This Body. Exaggeration of a curve exchanges time and again. Beside you in the car pieces the road together. With night, the force of would-be sleep beats through our bodies denied their liquid depth toward the always dangerous next. Dawn bleeds its sequence of ready signs. Time's skin shrinks under these 2,000 pounds of metal, not villages and fields, rivers into repetition, explodes eyeballs, windshields onto a distance, slopes of the air around nerve lost, would make limit 60 crash across my weight, still untransparent, in beat with the explosions, not talked about deafen. Cool.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you, Gina and Dan, for sharing all your thoughts with us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're here every day at 1 o'clock. It's always the same link. Tomorrow we'll be having Julian Schnabel in the house with Phong Bui. Look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you, you guys. Bye, Dan.
Thank you. Bye.
Gina.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for all the recommendations. We'll post them in the YouTube comment section so people can see them if they want.
Okay. I'll think of more and add them to the YouTube comments.
Yes. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Sai. Bye, Raymond. Bye, Alex. Thank you for letting us watch you work in your studio.
Bye, Raymond.
Bye, Nick. Bye, Meg. Bye, Lynn. Bye, Samantha.
Bye, you guys.
Thank you, internet overlords, for not sending us any trolls.
I know. I worry you'll get them tomorrow, but we were not enticing enough for the trolls.
No, you're perfect. Ciao, everyone.
Good thing I made that.
Bye, Archie. Send us a film.
Yeah, send us your film. How do I get out of here?